This lecture is going to be on the 1920s, basically about the things going on in the 1920s. Now, I'm kind of picking up where I left off from my last video, or the last lecture, when we basically ended with the fact that the women got the right to vote on August 26, 1920, and that it had been, and that is going to be the 19th Amendment, and that it had been 72 years after the Seneca Falls Convention. So you have this 19th Amendment, which is huge for the country for women. And then it was kind of like, well, what do we do now? We basically have fought for years upon years and decades upon decades, and we basically achieved what we wanted to get. And then people are kind of a little bit at a loss, or women are a little bit at a loss, because it's like, where do we go from here? Okay, so the movement really definitely began to splinter. Some pushing for enlarged women or enlarged roles for women just in society. Some basically wanted to focus on pacifism and world peace. Other people were focusing, or other women were focusing on labor and professional issues. Some women talked about equal rights just in society as a whole. And so you kind of have women kind of in a sense kind of going in all different directions. You have what was the League of Women Voters. The League of Women Voters in 1920, I'm sorry, let me back up. You are going to have the League of Women Voters. In 1920, the National American Women's Suffrage Association will then become what's known as the League of Women Voters. They'll advocate for political education, social reform, elimination of discriminatory laws against women. And then also you'll see what will be created is known as the Women's Joint Congressional Committee. And the Women's Joint Congressional Committee basically brought together like female organizers, and what they wanted to do, they wanted to like lobby and try to influence politics, and basically influence politics that would be things that would be positive for women. African American women in all this, they're really going to find that there's very little attention paid to them when you talk about these major organizations. So what they ended up doing is creating their own organizations. Basically, once again, you'll have the Colored Women's Political Group. At this point in time, you still have women, African American women, who are definitely very much involved in this and want to be involved in this, but you don't really see a huge amount of movement, of change within this group. And it's not them, I would say it's more so of society. Okay, now another thing that's going on, and this goes back to women wanting to do all different types of things and going in different directions. You're going to have Alice Paul, once again, and her National Women's Party. They will say, hey, we got a lot done and that was fabulous, and we need to push on and do more. And so they're basically going to fight for an equal rights amendment. And so you're going to have, by 1923, Alice Paul is going to will be able to get an equal rights amendment introduced into Congress. But once it gets into Congress, there's very little attention paid by Congress. A little attention paid in Congress and actually within the public itself, because there's not a huge, people don't feel, or women don't feel like there's a huge need for it. And it just kind of dies, and you really won't see it again. The Equal Rights Amendment, you really won't see this next movement, a huge push for it until like the 1960s. And so when you talk about this time period, there are a lot of women, like 1922, 1923, that are happy with what they've achieved. They're very happy with the fact that they have the right to vote. And for many women, they'll just leave it at that. Okay, obviously not Alice Paul, but there's women that are happy with that, and they're content and just kind of want to enjoy what they have. And so in a sense, that momentum of the women's suffrage movement and that women's political movement basically kind of dies out, if you will. Kind of, I would say, definitely by 23. It's just because the momentum kind of was lost, if you will. Okay, now I'm going to change gears, move away from the politics and the voting, and just talk about the 1920s and what's going on in the 1920s, because there's a lot of other things going on for women in the 1920s. In the 1920s, there's a huge interest for beauty and youth and basically being thin. Okay, so there's a huge push of that. Advertisements in this time period are going to definitely depict thin young women in their ads. And there's also a lot of push for like makeup and obviously different type of clothing, which we'll talk about. And there's also kind of like a look for women, which we will talk about. But it's the fact that it goes back to kind of this youth and beauty. Also in the 1920s, there's going to be a lot of like fad diets. And this once again plays into that youth and beauty. And it's just kind of this wave that tends to kind of take off in the 1920s. Now, in the 1920s, 1922, you're going to have Ida Rosenthal. Ida Rosenthal is going to create Maidenform, and Maidenform is going to create the first brassiere or the first bra. 1921 is going to be the first Miss American pageant. So once again, it's that focus on beauty. Okay. Another one, silent movies. Silent movies really reinforced like feminine behaviors. And you had all different types of behaviors. It wasn't just one, but once again, I would say they're kind of those feminine behaviors. You had Theda Bara, B-A-R-A. Theda Bara, she was kind of the vamp, right? That kind of vampy, kind of out there, kind of flirty girl out in society as one of your female actresses. You have Lillian Gish. She was kind of like the girl next door. You had Clara Bow. She was the sexy flapper. Okay, and then you had Mary Pickford. And actually, out of all of these, I would say Mary Pickford was probably the most popular one. Definitely financially, which she was probably better off of all of them. And she was kind of America's sweetheart. Okay, but I mean, all of them definitely would give Mary Pickford a run for her money. When you talk about popularity, Clara Bow was very popular. Theda Bara was very popular. Lillian Gish was also very popular. But I think kind of historically, kind of Mary Pickford kind of goes down there as that. Another thing, once again, going into beauty, cosmetics became very popular, very commonplace and very popular, and that's the whole reason for the popularity, is because they become commonplace. You're going to have Elizabeth Arden and Charles Renson. They are going to create Revlon, and Revlon is going to be your first brand of cosmetics that basically makes cosmetics available basically across the board. And would basically put it out there to mainstream society. So cosmetics were far easier to get, and obviously if you're a poor person, you're not going to be able to afford it, but if you're definitely middle class and above, you would definitely be able to afford it, and it was just far more easier to get with the Revlon products. Okay, African Americans. They had their own style, and you're definitely going to have a woman I want to talk about briefly, Sarah Breedlove Walker. In 1905, she is going to invent a chemical process or product that's for grooming African American hair, and then she'll patent it, and then she will actually be able to make a huge amount of money off of this. By 1910, Walker was definitely wealthy, and she had a company that employed over 2,000 workers. Now, Sarah Breedlove Walker, for extra credit, I'm giving you the opportunity to watch a Netflix series. It's called Self-Made. That is talking about Sarah Breedlove Walker. And then if you, this is the basic thing I have in my notes, but the more you go into reading and watching the movie, if you want to do that, talking about Sarah Walker, is she actually didn't, in a sense, invent it. She basically takes it from another woman that has this product, and she basically kind of takes it and she sells it on her own. Okay, so in a sense, when she goes down in the history books, basic history, it'll say that she invented it, and she actually didn't. She kind of somewhat stole it, and then used it on her own. In the books, like history books, they will say that her net worth, I've seen her net worth at 600,000 to about 800,000. But then in the movie, they're saying that she was a millionaire. So I'm definitely not gonna be, for me, that's not important, whether it's 600,000 or whether she's a millionaire. At that point in time, it was a huge amount of money, and she accomplished a lot. She became a very wealthy business owner that had, a company of over 20,000 people, and she was able to basically be self-made. And she took something, she ran with it, and she knew how to be that businesswoman. And so that's really what I find the most important about Sarah Walker at this point in time. So if you get a chance, definitely watch Self-Made. It's a good little mini series. It's 4 episodes. Each episode is over an hour. I think I want to say it's 2 hours, or maybe not quite 2 hours for each episode, but very good. Okay, now going back to mainstream America, marriage and family. Marriage in the 1920s was start to be seen more as a partnership, and it was a relationship based on friendship and a companionship, and seen more as a partnership. Motherhood. Motherhood was definitely seen as a thing of that mother should be educated. So if you find out you're pregnant, what you want to do, one of the first things you want to do is become educated. You want to become educated on the process of pregnancy, then also educated when you talk about raising children. So there tends to be a push on that. There tends to be more literature out there. Women are going to doctors and nurses for that information also. And also there's this idea that children should be raised as rational and educated adults, or basically being raised that way so they can be rational and educated adults. You also start to see couples having less children, and definitely raising the ones to be healthy and happy, and really focusing on that smaller family, and really focusing on the children that they have. Now, so that leads into the issue of birth control. Birth control obviously is still another major issue within the women's sphere. And I definitely want to talk about a woman by the name of Margaret Sanger. Margaret Sanger is definitely credited with creating the term birth control. She's going to devote her entire life to this cause. Margaret Sanger was trained as a nurse, and so she'll work as a nurse for a period of time, and then she kind of goes in the direction of birth control and really promoting birth control. Now, and it's definitely because of her background. Her mother had 18 births. Okay, she had 18 children. 11 of those children will survive. Her mother will die at 49. So she had 18 children by 49. And I take that back. I think it's Margaret Sanger was the 11th child out of 18, but I know all the children did not make it. And Margaret Sanger's life was definitely not far from privileged. They were probably kind of like on the edge of poverty. And this is one of the things that Margaret Sanger is going to talk about over and over and over again. She talks about the large families definitely leads into poverty. And she's saying that a lot of people can't even afford to have the kids that they're having. And then it leads into poverty, and then it puts the children into poverty, and then you start this basically cycle of poverty. And so she's going to make it her life's work to talk about and try to establish birth control within the country. She's going to distribute a monthly publication called The Woman Rebel. And she will put it out through the mail. You can get it basically on the street or through the mail. It advocated the woman's right to control her own body. It did not describe contraceptives, but it was clearly pro-contraceptives. Sanger will be arrested under the Comstock law because remember, she's mailing this, and so it will be considered to be obscene material because it was pro-birth control. Not that she talked about how to do it, but it was definitely clearly birth control. So she will actually go to jail several times during her career in her life. Family members will bail her out. She was married, she had kids herself. I think she had 3 kids. Her husband will bail her out, her sister will bail her out, and a month later she'll be back doing what she's doing. When there will be a time period when she and her sister will actually go to Europe, and they'll spend some time in Europe, and then they really are dead set on creating clinics when they come back to the United States. And so they will create a clinic for women, and there's definitely information about birth control. Both women will be arrested, and they'll be arrested several times with the clinic because she was not allowed to basically promote and talk about birth control. And her work will actually lead to a court ruling that only doctors could dispense information on birth control. Okay, she will finally, she basically kind of, she never stops, okay, but she kind of figures out how to do it. She'll eventually create what's known as the American Birth Control League. Okay, this is in 1921. She will create the American Birth Control League, and that basically promoted information for women on birth control. She had many clinics, and it'll basically, once one takes off, she'll open up many. Now, I want you to understand that the American Birth Control League will then be renamed in 1942, and that will be Planned Parenthood. Okay, now in 1923, she kind of gets it at this point in time. She kind of figures out the system. 1923, she'll open up a clinic staffed by doctors, and then once she has it staffed by doctors, then her clinics are good because it's the doctors that are basically giving information about birth control. And basically, the city and officials basically leave her alone at that point in time. Over the years, she'll have over 300 birth control clinics. Okay? And as we know, in 42, then they'll be renamed as Planned Parenthood. Other things that we've got to talk about. I mentioned it before, and I guess I should have talked about it with health and beauty, but I'm going to talk about it now. Other things about women for the 1920s. In the 1920s, you're going to have the rise of what's known as the flapper. And the flapper is a lot. It's not just like one thing. It's not one element. There's a lot of elements to it. Flappers tend to be younger, okay? But as the flapper movement takes on, I would say it kind of moves into a little bit older women, but this is definitely not your grandma thing, okay? Flapper is definitely a look, okay? And it's fashion, but it's more than fashion. And I have a slide on the PowerPoint. So the flapper look. The flapper look is going to be a bob haircut. A bob haircut can be like have your hair cut like just kind of like right at your jawline, or it can actually go to your shoulder length. It's usually not longer than shoulder length. Bob cut, basically just a straight cut, okay, and your hair just kind of falls. And it's a bob haircut, and all women will get it at this point in time, whether they have straight hair or whether they have curly hair. The cut is the bob cut. But by having a bob cut, and especially if you're doing it like at the jawline, you have short hair. Now, this is going to be the first time that women go in the direction of having short hair. Before the 1920s, if you're kind of talking 1918, women always had long hair. They had long hair, and they always put it up into a bun. And then in the 1920s, with the flapper look and flapper style, you now had short hair. And it was just easier for women to take care of. It's a different style, it's a different look, but it's just easier to take care of with that look. Okay. Another thing with the flapper look was dress. Okay. Before the 1920s, women wore dresses, skirts, blouses, dresses that basically had a neckline, okay, that went up into your neck. Usually you wore long sleeve or like quarter length sleeve. Your dress or skirt basically went down to your boot line. And so you did not see much of a woman. You saw basically her face and her hands and then maybe a little bit of her forearms, and that is it. Another thing with the dress is also you have layers of clothing. You usually have like a shirt, a blouse, and then you either have like a jacket, some type of like sweater, or you have kind of like a pinafore, kind of like an apron. The whole point is that you have layers of clothing. Same thing that is a skirt or dress. You usually have an undergarment that's under the actual skirt part of it. And so the fact is that women will wear layers of clothing. And so once again, you don't necessarily see a huge amount of the woman's body. With the flapper style, it's now your dresses are now one layer of material. And so it's definitely, you can see more of a woman. Another thing is that the dresses are, in a sense, more revealing. They are going to be short sleeve, or they could be kind of cap sleeve. They could also be sleeveless, okay? You could actually have a neckline, and they usually do have some type of neckline. And if sometimes they actually had a back to it, where the back line basically dropped. And you could actually have dresses that went, and this all kind of depended. It could kind of go to your knees, maybe slightly below your knees, or it could be kind of like that kind of 3/4 length type of dress skirt. But the fact is that you would see the ankle of the woman, definitely, okay, maybe kind of lower leg and definitely ankle of the woman. You would definitely see her arms. You might see a little bit of the chest, you might see a little bit of the back. And definitely shoulders if you have kind of the strapless, or the, not strapless, but the sleeveless. And so the fact is that with the flapper look, you're going to see more of the woman. And then also if your dress is now one layer, when the woman moved, you could potentially kind of see a little bit of the woman's body. So your flapper look is definitely far more revealing than in the past. Now, as we all know, styles are going to change, and eventually the flapper style will change, but it'll never really go back to that Victorian look, okay? You'll definitely get time periods where you have, you know, people who tend to wear like skirts and jackets and stuff. That's definitely a choice, but it never goes back to what it was before, like the 1920s. Okay, another thing with the look is always pearls, okay? That might be real pearls, they might be faux pearls, but you had pearls. And you usually wore a really long strand of pearls and doubled them up. That was also very classic flapper style. And also, usually your outfits like always matched. Okay, it's also very popular for women to wear hats at this point in time. And so your hat would definitely have to match your outfit. Your shoes would definitely have to match your outfit, okay? Because you got to look good, okay? Now, you could also have flapper look for every kind of like almost every look of life. You could have something that was very elegant that you could go out and party and dance in, or you could have something that was like every day that you might wear to work, or you would wear to church, or just kind of your everyday kind of clothing, but it all had this kind of flapper style to it. And so definitely there is a slide on the PowerPoint. You can definitely check out the flapper. And so with the whole flapper look and style, it was a little bit more freedom for women. Just your fashion, there was less restriction, okay? So there was definitely more freedom in that, okay? Now, this is also another part of flapper that's not necessarily the look or fashion, but it's the idea of women being more independent. If you were a proper lady before the 1920s, you did not smoke or you did not drink alcohol in public. The flappers smoke and they drink alcohol in public. And they're pushing the envelopes of society, and society is okay with it. Okay, so the women are having more freedoms in society. Another thing is that now women would basically go and do things on their own. They might meet up with a lady friend and go to lunch, or they would go to the movies. Or if you're like on the East Coast, you might go to like Coney Island and spend the day before a proper lady would have a male escort. And so you see that more, you see that more frequently happening. You also might meet up with a gentleman in town and not necessarily have the gentleman pick you up. So once again, it's more freedom for women. And that's what the flapper style is, or the flapper style way of life is about. It's about more independence for women in whether it's dress or social aspects. Now, another thing that I'm going to talk about for the 1920s is that the 1920s is going to be a time of consumerism. People have money, they tend to have money in the 1920s, and they're going to spend their money. But that also comes back to the flapper, because women have to buy these new looks. They have to buy all the dresses, and they've got to buy the faux pearls, and they're going to go to the hair salon and get their hair done, and that takes money. And so moving into that flapper style is a part of the 1920s, also because it's about consumerism. So we've got that. Okay, now other things going on. And this tends to be the arts. You have artists, you have women artists that are kind of coming into their own and being popular and respected for their works. Probably one of the most popular ones will be Georgia O'Keeffe, O''Keefe, Georgia O'Keeffe. She was known for painting the New York skyline, abstract landscapes, and what's referred to as erotic flowers. They're just kind of these big bursts of flowers. And Georgia O'Keeffe kind of was very popular at the time period, and she goes down as a very famous artist. And her artwork is still resonant today. She's still, in a sense, a popular artist for the things that she did back then. Okay, more artists, okay, in different ways, shapes, and forms. Actors, singers. One of the prominent women is going to be Josephine Baker. Josephine Baker, African American, is definitely going to be known for acting and singing, okay? Her song and dance was based on African American song and dance and music. And she was becoming an artist in the United States. I would say she had some popularity, but she also had some resistance. Okay, we know that there's a lot of prejudice in the United States, and there was a lot of prejudice against her. But she also, part of who she was and a part of like her persona when she went on stage was she was very revealing. Her dress was very, very revealing. It was definitely a flapper style dress, but she really pushed the boundaries of how much skin she was showing, and she was showing a lot of skin. And so the fact is that there was already prejudice against that, and there was also a little bit of a backlash to that. A lot of conservative Americans could not go that far. And so she will actually leave. She will actually leave the United States and go to Paris, France. And in Paris, France, she was very well received. And she basically did the same thing that she was doing in the US. She just did it in France. But she was seen as exotic, if you will. She was seen as so different, like they really hadn't seen anything before, and very exotic. And she put African American music, song, dance, basically on the map when you talk about Europe. And she was so well received in Europe that she will actually stay in Europe and maybe make a life in Europe and make a very good life, nice life financially in Europe. And so you definitely have that. Now, another thing I have to talk about when you talk about artists, I'm going to talk about it just in general. In the 1920s, you're going to have the Harlem Renaissance. The Harlem Renaissance is both male and female. It comes from, it basically starts in Harlem, New York, which is a predominantly African-American community in New York City. And what you see in the 1920s is that they're just celebrating their life and their culture through art, whether it's paintings, writings, poetry, song, music, dance, the blues, jazz music. You definitely see it coming from there, and they have this explosion of the Harlem Renaissance. And the artists at that point in time are really able to put themselves on the map, and they're really well known, meaning nationally well known. They really help put jazz and blues on the map. And you'll have some really famous singers, musicians come out of the blues and jazz time period, which then just continue on through with jazz and blues on through the years. And so the Harlem Renaissance is really about that celebration of African American culture. It's both men and women, but you're definitely going to have a lot of women that are going to be a part of it. A lot of singers and dancers will come out of that, like female singers and dancers come out of that. Okay, another thing in the 1920s, you're going to see, I had mentioned it before in one of my last lectures, that more women were starting, or some women were starting to become pilots. And in the 1920s, it's actually very popular for women to become pilots. There's actually female pilot society, or female pilots organizations. The most popular one was called the 1920's. And it really promoted women being pilots. It really promoted it, really supported it. And you definitely see this kind of wave in the 1920s. Amelia Earhart, a pilot herself, is actually going to break the first world record in 1922, she basically set the record for the highest altitude for a woman. She will be known as the First Lady of Air. She will lecture on aviation extensively. She will, for a period of time, be president of the 1920's, and she'll also become what's known as the aviation editor for Cosmopolitan magazine. Now, I need to explain Cosmopolitan. When you talk about Cosmopolitan magazine in the 1920s and in this time period, Cosmopolitan is not the same it is the same magazine, but it changes, okay? It changes in the 1960s to the Cosmo that we know today. But back then, the Cosmopolitan magazine was about a lot of things. It was about like the flapper style, but it was also about promoting women to do a lot of things in society, about getting an education, becoming pilots. She is actually the aviation editor, so they're going to have a section dedicated just for female pilots. But it's about that. It's about promoting education. It's about promoting professional jobs. But it's also about promoting the home life and raising kids. And so it would kind of like all-encompassed kind of magazine, okay? Now, we're going to talk about it when we get into the 1960s, but Cosmo is going to change in the 1960s, and it's radically going to change to what we know today. Okay, so anyway, she was editor for the aviation section of Cosmo. Now, in 1937, okay, she's going to attempt to fly around the world. Amelia Earhart was lost somewhere in the Pacific. So she will never return home, and it's kind of one of those ongoing mysteries of whatever happened to Amelia Earhart and her plane. The fact is that they obviously have not found Amelia Earhart. She also had a co-pilot, or I should say a navigator with her, a gentleman with her. Neither of them have ever been found. The plane has never been found. And so there's been a lot of speculation over the years. And I don't think we've had a real truly definitive answer of whatever happened to Amelia Earhart. Okay, another thing, religious leaders. There's going to be an evangelicist by the name of Amy Semple McPherson. She's not basically the only female minister, okay? But she, at this point in time, when you're talking about like 1920s, probably one of the best well-known, okay? At 18, she married Robert Semple, or Semple, I'm sorry, and converted to the Pentecostal evangelicalism. Her husband will die, and she will work for the Salvation Army for a period of time, and then she'll marry Harold McPherson. And when she married him, then that's when they kind of go into the direction of actually preaching. 1921, she'll build her dream church, if you will. It's called the Angelus Temple in Los Angeles. And the temple was the center for the Church of the Four Square Gospel. We still have the Four Square Gospel today. And that was her church, the Church of the Four Square Gospel. She could have up to 5,000 attendees for a service. She was known to be a very good minister, and when I say minister, I mean like preaching minister, and that's what she was known for. In the 1920s, she'll actually tour the United States, the British Isles, and also France. She also was a millionaire. Okay, now Amy McPherson will eventually kind of like die out. It's kind of like that spark that kind of dies out. There's some problems within the church, and there's some financial problems within the church. I believe she actually divorces her husband, and then there's financial problems within her church, and she kind of like fades away, if you will. But at the time, she was definitely at her height, and she was doing something that women don't normally do, definitely pushing the boundaries. Okay, women scientists. You are starting to have more women scientists. Not a lot, but more of them. Alice Hamilton was a pathologist. She was actually interested in contamination of factory workers, and this is in 1925. She will become the leading industrial toxicologist. And one of the things that she tried to do was try to clean up the factories. She'll say that there was a lot of germs, a lot of bugs in the factories, and she wanted to clean up the factories. Another example, writers. Elizabeth Wharton is going to be the first woman to win the Pulitzer, I always want to call it Pulitzer Surprise, the Pulitzer Prize. So Edith Wharton is going to be the first woman to win that award. She will write The Age of Innocence, and that's one of the things, or one of the writings that she will go down basically famous for. Edna Millay, M-A-M-I-L-L-A-Y, was a poet and a playwright, and she will also receive the Pulitzer Prize. There is another woman, Crystal Quintasket, Q-U-I-N-T-A-S-K-E-T. She is a Native American, an Okangan, a Native American, Crystal Quintasket. And she will write, she'll write Half-Blood, a depiction of the Great Montana Cattle Range. And she'll also write Mourning Dove. It's M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G, Mourning Dove. And she definitely, this is truly pushing the boundaries for her. You don't see a huge amount of Native American writers, and especially women Native American writers. And she definitely is put on the map as a writer. Okay, and this is actually where I talked about it. I was looking through my notes real quick and I didn't see the Harlem Renaissance, so I started talking about it. So I apologize. I'm going to talk about it again. And I want to talk about it in the sense of some female artists. Nella Larson, she wrote Quicksand and Passing, and that will really kind of cement her career as a writer, and she was very popular in the 1920s. Singers, you will have many singers singing at cabaret clubs, or like one of the biggest ones was known as a cotton club. They were cabarets, they were like jazz clubs, so you have a huge amount of singers there. You have a woman by the name of Gertrude Pritchett, okay, or Gertrude Pritchett Rainey, I'm sorry, Gertrude Pritchett Rainey, and she was known as Ma Rainey, and that was her name. Everybody called her Ma Rainey. And Ma Rainey was known as the mother of the blues. And then you also have Bessie Smith. Bessie Smith goes down from what I've read, basically as the world's greatest blues singer. So you definitely have women that will make their name in the arts, and then especially in the Harlem Renaissance. Okay, now, having said all the things that I say, there are definitely barriers for women. There's definitely still prejudice against women for the things that they're trying to do and wanting to do. One of the biggest ones was voting, because you still have people not believing that it was a woman's place to be voting. African American women are going to have even stronger challenges and stronger barriers. They will have that, just as a community, will have Jim Crow laws, which will definitely prevent them from voting. So there definitely still is a lot of barriers. You have interracial marriages were definitely forbidden by law, so that's another barrier. Even though women were entering into college more than they had over the previous year, they received 1/3 of the degrees, but they only made up about 4% of the population. So even though more women are going into college and more women are getting degrees, they will receive 1/3 of the degrees, but they will make up only 4% of the professionals. And then also, women are still paid less than men just across the board, no matter where you go, what field, what status you are, they're definitely paid less than men. Reform. You have Carrie Chapman Catt will create the National Conference on the Cause and the Cure of War. Jane Addams will be a part of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. And so these are just kind of organizations that are by women that are looking to create reform. I don't want to diminish them, but you don't see them achieve anything, okay? And it's not that what they're not doing and trying to get their word out is not good, but it's just that they're not achieving anything at this point in time. When you talk about Hispanic population, you definitely have the Hispanic population, and you have people migrating into the United States. For the most part, Hispanic population is really going into agricultural labor positions, unless they already have that established ranch or established farm, like in the Southwest, but you definitely see a lot of them doing the labor work, especially if you have newly immigrating people coming in. They're definitely going to be agricultural labor. Women, one example would be Maria Hernandez will argue for equal rights, improved education for the poor and for the Hispanics. You'll also see with Maria Hernandez try to get some political activism. It just doesn't go very far. You just don't see it within this community. And so in a sense, it kind of dies off, if you will, kind of that push. She kind of makes a push for it, and it's not really well received, and it really doesn't go anywhere. African Americans, thousands of African American women will join or create women's clubs, improvement organizations. They're there to fight for better education in segregated schools. Another big one that they're trying to fight against is the issue of lynching. You have Mary Talbert will create the anti-lynching campaign or crusade. Lynching right is when you just basically take a person off the street and kill them. And usually within the African American community, it doesn't have to be, but one of the popular forms of lynching was basically hanging. And so that is definitely a major problem. I would say more so in the South, not completely in the South, but more so in the South. Unfortunately, that had been an ongoing issue within the African American community. Okay, that is the end of the lecture on life after World War I. Sorry.